Hello and welcome to today's web seminar, Quality World-Class Agile Organizations, sponsored by BC Forward and featuring Jennifer Franklin, Chad Manley, and Michael Falice. I'm your host and moderator, Rochelle Sawal. Before the presentation begins, let me explain the console. The panels on your screen can be moved around and resized to your preference. At the bottom of your console is a widget toolbar. By clicking on the Handouts widget in the middle, you can download a PDF of the speaker's slides and a thought leadership packet. If you experience any technical issues, please let us know by typing in the Q&A panel to the left. This is also how you submit questions for the speaker. There will be a Q&A session at the end, so feel free to enter in your questions throughout the presentation. Finally, to optimize your bandwidth for the best viewing experience, please close any other applications you may have running in the background. This event is being recorded and will be made available to watch on demand. Once the recording is ready, you'll get an email with instructions about how to access the presentation. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to our speakers.
Thank you, Rochelle. Appreciate it. This is Michael Falice. I am tapping it forward here. Here we go. So hey, our hope and goal is to talk about quality in world-class Agile organizations. Myself and Jen and Chad will be talking. We'll be introducing ourselves in just a second. Before we did, we wanted to take a quick poll and kind of get a pulse for what everyone is doing in terms of their own Agile implementations, as well as whether or not they have centralized or decentralized quality within their organizations. And then we'll get into some introductions and get started. So I'm going to get to where the polling actually is. So again, first two questions just on some polling. And then if you'd like to get anything specific away from today's session, please put it into the Q&A and we will make sure to get that answered. I have to click around a lot, so I feel like my eyes are going everywhere, but we'll get to it. All right, first question. Who is using an Agile approach as their current software development lifecycle? Please click yes or no. All right, that's great. We'll keep watching the ticker go up as people switch to Safari from Chrome, as many of us may have made the mistake. All right, maybe it was just me. All right, good. So it looks like oops, we'll keep going here. Here's the next question. In your quality organization, is it centralized or decentralized as you guys have implemented Agile? So it looks like about 90 some odd percent have had Agile implementation, so we kind of get an idea. It'll be interesting to see how this one plays out. Hopefully this webinar will be a great distraction over the next hour so that people aren't clicking the refresh on their various news sites, but we're looking forward to discussing. So this one's looking almost like half and half, which is great. I mean, that gives us a good feel for as organizations are implementing Agile, whether it's in kind of a centralized or a decentralized model. And I think clearly you can do both and be very successful with both. So it'll be great to see kind of as we tailor our presentation, we'll be looking at it from both those perspectives. All right. We're going to cut it off there just so we can continue to move forward. In today's presentation, get those into the Q&A, and we will certainly get to them either at the end or I will be monitoring those during today's webinar. So we'll certainly try to get to them as well. First and foremost, we're going to be talking about, I think the idea of scaling Agile and how we, as we look to Agile, how we make sure that quality is at the forefront of it. So we're going to be talking a lot about, quality within Agile implementations and then some best practices that we can take away from that. But spending a lot of time on Agile transformations solutions, agile implementations, and then how quality can play a part in that. So we'll certainly be spending the bulk of today's presentation on that. And with that, I would love to have my fellow panelists introduce themselves. Jen, could you introduce yourself, please?
Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Franklin. I'm the Vice President of Solution Delivery with BC Forward. So I help our teams build, test, and deploy software solutions, as well as help clients with organizational change management and some of the other capabilities that they need for digital transformation and delivering new product capabilities to market. I've been with BC Forward since 2008 and had the honor of leading our quality management practice for a number of years. So love the topic and the intersection of Agile and how we can build quality management practices by design into Agile and build strong teams and strong outcomes as a result.
Thanks, Jen. Chad, did you want to go?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Chad Manley. I'm the Senior Advisor of Enterprise Agility with BC Forward. I help leadership and teams start to adopt that Agile mindset, help to increase their Agile maturity, both as a team and an organization. I support all of the BC Forward clients and their PMOs that we work through to ensure that they're looking at quality practices and, within those organizations and how we can tailor those, new approaches to be able to supplement the direction that they're trying to move as far as, doing traditional or waterfall ways of working into more of an Agile or Scrum approach.
Great. Thanks, Chad. And I'm Michael Felice, the Senior Director of
Michael, are you? I think we lost you.
Please hold for technical
Am I
difficulties.
back? I didn't touch any. Well, no. All right. I will attempt to call. Nope. Looks like I'm back on air. I don't know if people can hear me or not. It looks green. I think I'm going to keep going.
I can hear you, Mike.
Okay, great. So sorry about that, guys. I'll keep monitoring this. Hopefully the internet is stable here. One of the things that we wanted to do before we got started, I think in the last couple of months, if not the last 6 to 8 months, I certainly think that we've seen the idea of everything getting digitized, and clearly from whether that's regardless of industry, unfortunately a lot of us now working remote due to the pandemic, we certainly have now seen a huge demand for digital products. And whether that be in the healthcare space, whether that be in retail or food or whatever it might be, we certainly have seen that growing. And quite frankly, I think the customer expectations are also growing and rising based on the fact that they want everything to be the same as, ordering something off of Amazon or whatever it might be. So I think with that in mind, making sure that we've got a scaled Agile model, regardless of your industry, is going to be critically important. So what I would definitely what we would definitely want to give as a backdrop is the fact that we are seeing a lot of those types of changes that have happened not only in the last year, in the last 6 to 8 months, but also just moving forward. We're seeing some shift and changes within the idea of what IT and what IT core services are going to be about. So let's take a look at just where we believe things have been in IT and in terms of what we have traditionally done, and then where we believe we'll be going. If we look towards IT in the next 3 to 4 years, one of the things that we see is really a predominant shift from the idea of being very much a traditional, on-premise, applications that are on-premise, that are being hosted by organizations, to really saying, we've got to provide digital technology services to not only our own internal businesses, but also to our customers. And so this has become a huge shift. And this research comes via Gartner and some other forums that really sort of solidifies the fact that we in IT are going to be seeing a huge shift in the idea of being kind of that normal core IT services to really saying, okay, how do we push data? How do we push our applications all into the cloud? And then providing more digital products and more digital services to organizations. So I think that's really where IT is going to be going over the next several years, if it hasn't gone there already. And I think one of our, one of the main reasons is to just create more products so that organizations can be more competitive. One of the organizations that we work with has recently decided that they had to get rid of legacy systems and really adapt more SaaS-based applications and products simply to just be competitive with their industry and their landscape. And so I think that is a very typical thing that we're seeing as we move over the next few years. And I think what's happened with the last 6 to 7 months in the pandemic has just accelerated that for organizations to really need that. So now we know that we need to scale Agile. We know that we need quality and to maintain that quality. So all these things kind of converge into the idea of having a very scaled Agile model, but also keeping quality. And that really brings us to our next slide, which is really our infographic on the fact that quality has to be at the forefront of any type of a scaled Agile approach. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Chad to start talking a little bit about this graphic and about the scaled Agile approach.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, so this is our flywheel, we like to call it, to our scaled approach to implementing quality in an organization. We'll get more in depth into each of these competencies as the presentation goes, but at a high level, we're going to talk about lean portfolio management and how we empower your leadership to align your PMO with quality. We're going to talk about product management in that, we're going to enable organizations to get better focus and to shift their mindset from a project mindset to a product mindset. We're going to talk about OCM, which you definitely can't leave off the table, right? Organizational change management. We need consistency through the change. Is it repeatable? Is it scalable, right? We're going to talk about continuous learning culture and doing quality by design and leveraging design thinking approaches and capturing real-time feedback to make changes to the way that your products are being delivered. Which leads right into Agile delivery. So we want to maximize testing. We want to increase the velocity and accuracy with, of course, adopting an optimal blend between automation and manual testing. We want to scale compliantly. Definitely don't want to leave that off the table. With a lot of large organizations, they have regulatory compliance aspects, especially financial services, pharma, biotech, medical devices, right? You have to work within that compliance framework and ensure that your products being delivered meet those regulatory requirements. And then, of course, portfolio metrics and tools. So how are we measuring consistently across the portfolio? Are we just looking at, what the teams are doing, or are we trying to push that up to get maybe more of an organizational view on how our teams are delivering value, and is it quality value, right? So this being kind of our holistic approach to quality in a scaled Agile environment. And again, we'll talk more in depth around these in the following slides in this presentation.
Thanks, Chad. That's perfect. So what we'll be doing next is really just kind of double clicking into each one of these 7 areas that we've outlined here. So we'll go to the next one, and Chad, will have you kind of kick us off here.
Sure. Yeah. So I think, arguably one of the most important, especially if your entire organization is moving more towards an Agile approach to work, you need to have empowered leadership. And in order to do that, right, you need them to be able to gain visibility into, what work is going on. And we're not talking about at the micro level, what the teams are doing, but effectively when we scale Agile, we want to know what those initiatives are, what those epics are that the teams are delivering against. And we want to make sure that, we're being dynamic and that we're measuring the benefit hypothesis and ensuring that, the non-functional requirements are being baked into the solutions that they're building. We want to determine what works. So, we want to regularly inspect and adapt our work to make incremental assessments towards, what those outputs look like, and then progress towards those outcomes as far as, what feedback we do get throughout that process. And then we also want to optimize investments. So back to that lean startup, that MVP approach, we want to be able to have the flexibility to pivot or persevere. And so what we want to be able to do there is reallocate funds to maximize that throughput of value. If we see that, we're not meeting the benefit hypothesis, or that our leading indicators, are pointing us to an opportunity to pivot away towards something more valuable, we want to have that flexibility to do that.
Hey, Chad, can you maybe give an example of like where a Kanban board might be able to help a leader in an organization in terms of just kind of being able to gain visibility? Or, do leaders normally look at Kanbans, or how do you use that as a way to empower leadership?
Yeah, and Kanban boards are an incredibly powerful tool, right? Especially if you're in an agile environment right now. I mean, you're effectively looking at your sprint board, which is a Kanban board at a team level. But when we start to scale up and we look at, agile release trains, or, if you're doing less, or Nexus, or some other scaled agile approach, you need to have visibility into what your team of teams is doing, right? So having a Kanban board at a, what I'll refer to as a program level gives you oversight into what are those, maybe larger deliverables that the teams are working towards. And, we're going to enforce some WIP limits there, right? Work in progress. So we're not going to overload our teams because we're trying to make reasonable commitments. We're trying to share in that commitment between the business and the IT, right? And then, of course, to your point, in the slide, we have a portfolio level Kanban, which then spans across the organization and starts to look at, in those various programs or agile release trains, we're all working towards maybe a common capability or solution that we're trying to deliver. So we want to get visibility into that as well. And really what we're trying to do is just make reasonable commitments, not overload people, and allow management to have the flexibility to look at that and say, okay, we've made some reasonable investment in this. It didn't pan out the way we needed to. It's time to shift and go towards something that might be more valuable for us.
Oh, that's great. No, that's great. Thanks, Chad. I think that's very helpful. I think as we start to empower, our leadership, the part of it is to better understand how we do that through the lens of quality. Jen, did you want to talk a little bit more about how we, as on the quality side, can do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we are out coaching and training teams that are pursuing Agile, one of the things that we focus on a lot with them from a lean perspective, right, is eliminating waste out of the process and the system. And so one of the easiest ways that we coach our teams to do that, right, is to look at quality as a strategic partner to improve the process up front versus react at the end of a development cycle to what is being packaged and put together and placed into the environment. I think that this really helps set the bar for, like you mentioned, from a customer experience and user experience perspective. The bar is set much higher today in the modern digital world we live in, beyond working software, right? So we used to say the bar was at working software. And so what we really coach teams on is really quality's role, not just making sure that the software is functional as a baseline, but looking at, is it intuitive, right? So is a user going to be able to pick up the software, the new feature that we're developing, and immediately understand how to use it? And not only is it intuitive to use, but does it add value in saving time moving through a business process? Does it eliminate human error with our design? And if not, when we're iterating through that development lifecycle, are there ways for us to embed that feedback into the process with the dev team very early on in the process? And I think a lot of leadership understands how that can work in theory, but the beauty of kind of bringing those elements together is seeing it in real life, right? And we see clients who do this every day, where you will have an issue on a production line that has the opportunity to shut down product that needs to ship out the door to patients in the healthcare and life sciences industry. That we're able to actually come in and do usability testing early on in the sprint cycle and eliminate some of those errors that operators would make on the line due to placement of a button on the UI, right? or an extra step being added in that they're not used to in a specific method. And so a lot of times we'll start with talking to leadership about their vision and the objectives that they have for each of those sprints or program increments, and then weave together the quality strategy on how we can collaborate with the dev team to integrate that quality and design approach and have our definition of done reflect those objectives for the entire team.
Thanks, Jen. I think that's great. One of the questions that was asked of the group was, are you an advocate of end user experience in terms of quality? I think that was kind of what the question was asking.
Absolutely. I think we've seen above and beyond results when we've done our own testing, web apps, as well as, like I said, even desktop apps that are used in a very technical, hands-on environment where that end user testing as early in the process as, post-unit testing just from a high fidelity prototype even is immensely valuable. And Chad mentioned we'll also be talking about how we've woven in design thinking to our development approach. And some of that has to do with quality as well, because what end users can help inform you on is the actual priority for a product, right? And so we have a case study we'll talk about a little bit later here where we were able to use design thinking to really help us prioritize how we were going to develop the solution. And that helped inform also our quality assurance priorities as a team as well. And so I think it's immensely important where you have the ability to bring users in early and often in this life cycle. And I think if you're in an organization, whether you're centralized or decentralized, if you can bring your business partners to the table and have them understand how that empowers their users or their clients, there's gains to be made across the board, because then you reduce your market risk, right? You're not just reducing technical risk in that process, but you're also reducing the market risk of building something that doesn't meet your end client's expectations or your end user's expectations in the long run.
Well, thanks, Jen. That's great. I was thinking maybe I should wait on this question because I know we're coming to it in a couple of slides. Chad, did you want to talk a little bit about the next element within productization?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about productizing things, right, we're talking about, sales enablement here. We want products or product management groups that are able to articulate that value. And we're not talking about return on investment, but, what is the subjective value that we're trying to deliver here? Of course, we want to make money, right? But sometimes the products that we're developing are for internal customers, right? So we want to ensure that we're providing that value, and we do that through early and often feedback, right? Risk reduction. I mean, that's one of the main reasons why, organizations find Agile more palatable is because of that immediate risk reduction. We're working in, a time box, right? We can pivot very easily. We can mitigate risk much easier. And so product management helps with reducing the risk of those product failures. Market watch. So, product management aligns with the market needs, and, they're obviously looking at market segmentation, market rhythms, what are the market events that we need to be aligned with, and, what those organizational objectives are to be able to deliver that product. And then, of course, we're trying to future-proof here with product management. We want to look ahead and we want to know where the market's going. We want to, empathize with our customers or whomever it is that's consuming our products, and be able to be out in front of what those changes might be that, the market is bringing.
Great. Thanks, Chad. Let's talk then a little bit about when it comes to productizing and creating, more of that, going from project to product. How does quality then play a part in that? And what does that look like? Jen, did you want to kick us off?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, I always look at it like it's the alignment of commitment and purpose, right? So you have that North Star. And I think that quality plays a really critical role when you look at what's on your screen there with the roadmap of leveraging horizontal checkpoints across cross-functional teams to make sure that we're integrating and we are testing and validating that the objectives that we set forth either in that sprint or that PI are being met. And like Chad said, you're adapting on the fly, right? So there's emerging feedback. At the same time, I think we are moving, ideally into a more test-driven development lifecycle where you're building in quality through built-in code reviews, right? You're looking at architectural reviews. So Chad talked a lot about scalability. And we look at that from the future state as well. What you're building needs to be scalable. And I think if we've all learned anything in this remote period this year, right, that your load and performance has to be able to meet and exceed the needs that you could even imagine your product requiring out in the marketplace, right? Look at Zoom and the technology that everyone has adapted with being remote this year. So I think all of those elements are key. And then I think that the third piece of that a lot of organizations sometimes shy away from and they don't fully invest in is the capabilities that automation brings to the table and being able to identify those early in an iterative life cycle so that you can start building that framework together so that by the time you're packaging for release, we're building into our process how we can validate that the system meets its functionality requirements, and we can do so in a very efficient way.
Thanks, Jen. Yeah, I would agree. I think pipelining and really identifying pipelines has been a huge part of organizations that have kind of gone from this idea of a finite project to now this sort of continuum of just having a product that lasts, the life cycle of the entire product. And by doing so, I think you really get then into this idea of having a pipeline and then introducing automation as early and as often as possible so that you get then build in that continuous integration with your development teams and with the rest of your IT team. So I really think that pipelining and Jen really hit the nail on the head here with the idea of really being continuously integrated with the organization and really building out that pipeline. I think that's been a real fundamental thing that we've seen with successful organizations and that have implemented Agile, as well as then that automation as part of that.
Yep, and then I just add, from the graphic that we're seeing here, right, that, when we start to scale Agile, especially in the SAFe framework, we're adding new roles, right? So traditionally at a team level, we just have a product owner and he's that voice of the customer. We think about the Agile Manifesto, business people and developers working together daily, right? In my early in my career when I was a Scrum Master, it's like, just reach out to the business people, right? Don't wait for me to facilitate that. If you're a developer or tester, just reach out to them. But when you scale and you're in a very large organization where that's really just not possible, that product manager really becomes that voice of the customer. But it's a strategic point of view, right? So they're looking at the strategy over, in SAFe, what we call a program increment, which is a time box typically aligned with a fiscal quarter. And that product manager serves as the voice of the customer. And then those product owners become a proxy to that product manager so that we're able to scale that up and not have, 5 to 12 different product owners reaching out to the same business people. We now have centralized that from a strategic point of view to ensure that we're delivering on a roadmap.
Oh, thanks, Chad. No, I agree. I think this is, that first slide when we talk about empowering leadership. I think organizations kind of get the idea that their leaders are on board with, yep, we're going to do Agile and we're going to, start using automation and we're going to do all these things, and leaders get on board with that. Then we start to really go from projects to products. And this is where things, I think, really start to slip a bit because people have such a project mentality in terms of how I want to get things done. So this idea of just a continuum and not necessarily always having a finite or understanding a definition of done, which we'll be talking about. I think this is where we start to see things go from being agile to more wagile, and that's really where quality can help, with some of those definitions. The next piece of our pie is organizational change management. Chad, did you want to kick us off here again?
Absolutely, and I think it's something that that gets left off the table more often than not, and it's incredibly important, right? If you're developing new solutions or delivering value, you need to have a proper organizational change management approach in place. And so just to simply define it here, what OCM is, it's to guide and prepare and equip and support individuals to successfully adopt the change. It's to empower stakeholders to understand what is changing and prepares them. And then also it's critical for successful scaled agile transformation. So back to, that first point around empowering leadership, we want to empower leadership to take charge of these types of transformations. We want to equip them and also plan with them around what that change management strategy looks like and how it's going to be executed against. And absolutely one of those facets or one of those components is, how do we treat quality in this transformation? Where do they sit at the table? What kind of tools are we going to equip them with? What kind of mindset do they need to have? So it's all incredibly important as you look at a large organization, how you intend on transforming it. Do you have a proper organizational change management strategy in place?
Thanks, Chad. That's great. Let's talk a little bit more in depth about quality and what role quality plays. Jen, did you want to kick us off here again, please?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we reinforce, like Chad mentioned, with organizational change management with our teams, is the old adage used to be quality is everyone's job. And, what we find in moving from this project orientation to product is really kind of the product management and ownership elements of how do we design a good product? How do we bring systems thinking into the development lifecycle is everyone's job, right? And so if you are a practitioner from a quality perspective, we're encouraging our team members to think of the holistic experience, the holistic life cycle of the system, the processes that inform and input data into the system and how that's used across the entire life cycle. And then to Chad's point, that's what enhances the collaboration across the team members, because you're coming from that empathy-centered design component when you're designing testing, right? When you're designing your quality assurance approach and any verification and validation that you're going to be building out. And I think sometimes that gets missed in our practices because we try to be very black and white about what fits in the box of functionality, what doesn't fit in the box of functionality. And I think the world and the advancements that we're seeing from a digital technology perspective don't fit in that prescriptive proverbial box, right? And so we're always looking for how do we add value to the team? And a lot of times from a quality perspective, that's coming from different elements of how you support that product owner, how you plug into that product lifecycle, even beyond the technology, right? In terms of how is someone going to use this product and how will we adapt the way that they're going to use it to our thought process and how we pursue quality. And so I think that's really the thing that we try and reinforce with our teams is recognizing those opportunities to identify those things, elevating them to leadership to be able to guide the team, and identifying any issues that we see up front that don't align to that vision from a quality perspective.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think one of the interesting things that we find is 5 to 10 years ago, whether it was been a part of people embracing Agile or whether it's been technology, there were actually roles like the change manager or the release manager. Like years ago, there was actually that role, and I think we've all but seen that disappear from organizations. I think predominantly because of technology, with tools like Jenkins and those tools that make it quite frankly very easy to do releases. However, I also think that through embracing Agile and just the idea that we're going to be iterative, you sort of see that role going away or being absorbed by other entities like a product owner or a Scrum Master or something else in the organization has kind of absorbed this, and yet it hasn't necessarily stood out to have one person driving it. And that's where I really believe that quality can help make sure to continue to drive that organizational change management, so that as people are seeing the need for it, quality can help continue to be a driver in that. So I think that certainly has been an important thing that we've seen change. If we just look back, 5 to 10 years ago, those roles where people were in those roles and they were helping drive this, they're not there anymore. So that's where quality has to continue to be a part of that process.
Yep. And just one thing I will add, because I think, especially in large organizations that have robust architecture, right, it's aspirational to go in and tell them tomorrow you guys are going to start doing, automated testing or using release management tools, right? So we try to get them in that mindset, and we try to get them to start approaching their work, vertical slices, right? Is what it is that you're developing. Are you including the design? Are you including the build, the test, right? Is it deployable? Are we, engaging quality at the beginning to ensure that we understand, the ramifications for what it is we're building? Do we have the right assessment from quality to ensure that, that we're following the right process from a non-functional requirement standpoint. And so I think, that we do work with our clients, right, to move towards here's automated tools that you can use, but, supporting them through that process is a journey, right? And, just getting them equipped with the right mindset and the right approach, developing better acceptance criteria using, Cucumber as, an example, right, that helps with facilitating automated testing is definitely part of that journey.
Perfect. Thanks, Chad. And speaking of automation and continuous learning, let's maybe talk about the fourth thing on our puzzle.
Yeah, so quality by design, right? Leveraging the collective knowledge, experience, and creativity of the workplace, customer, supply chain, and broader ecosystem. When we talk about DevOps, one of the components of your continuous delivery pipeline, especially in SAFe, is that continuous exploration aspect. And Jen, I think you touched on that a little bit earlier too, around taking that design thinking approach from a development standpoint, right? Are we doing behavioral driven development there? And also, are we looking for new opportunities to deliver value? We want to harness those forces of change, right? We want to build that momentum, and we want to point it in the right direction based on the strategy of the organization we work with. Embrace curiosity, exploration, and invention, entrepreneur, right? We want innovation, and we want to bake that into our processes, not just something we do, when time permits, but we want to have innovation riptides. We want to have, as part of, our company or organizational culture, places and spaces and time allotments to be able to innovate and not just go out and build something that brings no value to the organization, but with the focus on, how can we be innovative to try something new, right? And let's think about, bringing those people together through a hackathon or a workshop to start to ideate through those things and capture some really great ideas that we can start to think about implementing. And then obviously, right, optimizing that flow of value with fluid organizational structures. Jen, you touched on it a little bit ago, right? And you didn't call it out, but I knew where you were going with, looking at the development value stream, looking at the operational value stream. When we talk about lean, we're trying to reduce waste, right? And it's incredibly important to have flow through your value stream.
Jen, I'll have you kick this off. I know we've been alluding to this slide, I think, for the last several ones.
This is one of my favorite aspects, I think, in modern quality, where we have the opportunity to integrate design thinking. The piece that I love about design thinking, and to the person who asked the question about bringing end users in early, is it removes the unconscious bias that we as a team have towards the use or the purpose of the system or the product that we're developing. And it really helps us challenge assumptions when we're in that build process. And so we have an example where we were working with one of our clients who is a human services agency, and we were developing a new user interface and process flow for a crisis intervention moment. And we were collecting data from multiple sources and tracking that data. And what we actually found out, to Chad's point around reorienting the purpose and kind of focusing in on how to be innovative in that life cycle, was when we brought the decision makers in versus when we talked to the end users, was the end users actually wanted something very simple from a UI perspective because they're in crisis management mode, right? So they want a widget that makes it absolutely foolproof for them to ensure that they are focusing all of their energy on the human being in front of them and not having to worry about the technology and how data is getting off the tablet that they're entering it into in a hospital setting and over into the appropriate tracking mechanism, right? So we were able to really redesign our entire backlog and then identify our priorities from a quality perspective to focus on the data and the logic and how we were able to trace that information through the business process, but kind of ideate through making the data visible in a very approachable manner for someone who has had a very horrific life event happen to them, and making sure that they have that strong customer support experience, but they feel like their privacy is protected and they feel like the data is secure. And so we were able to, like I said, kind of reorient the entire thought process we had around the design for that tool based on just that early design thinking process and bringing those end users into the fold earlier. So I think it's definitely a tremendous value wherever you can bring them in. And then I think also, if you don't have that opportunity, there are ways, like Chad mentioned with the hackathon, that you can drive innovation into that design process in a very organic way and test some of your own assumptions before you start to build.
Yep, and I just add to that, Jen, that I think the underlying quality that you want to have, not no pun intended there, but is to have empathy, right? To connect with those end users. You touched on it perfectly when you said you guys went to the end users versus the decision makers, and you empathized with them. You developed a persona around you're in crisis mode. What does that mean, right? And what kind of answers or value am I trying to get out of this product? I don't care what it looks like. I'm trying to get to the information that I'm seeking, right?
Well, thanks, Chad and Jen. That's great. I really think that this design thinking is such a huge piece of the puzzle that it's such a huge piece that we've actually created our own training class around it. So no, it's definitely been an important piece, and certainly we'd love to talk more. If anyone has questions about that, we can do that in the Q&A. But moving on, Chad, let's talk a little bit more about Agile delivery.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about Agile delivery, right, first and foremost, if we're talking about transitioning from a project mindset to a product mindset, we need to accomplish that through organizing around business value. Okay, we want the business to consume the products that you as technologists, developers, testers are developing, right? And we want them engaged and participating throughout that process. Actually, just wrapped up PI planning this week. Got through our final breakout sessions today, and it's our second PI for this particular group. PI 1, we didn't have much business involvement, but once we started doing demos, got them engaged, we brought them on board. And for PI 2, we actually stood up 2 business-focused Agile teams who are working through that design thinking process, who are continuously exploring for new features and functionality, who are participating and providing work that are dependent for the other teams that are developing and releasing the value. Value is delivered when customers need it, right? And that gets supported by tools, right? I mean, when we talk about, separating deployment from release, we need tools that allow us to be able to push things into production, do that final smoke test, ensure that's not a crash our site before we let our customers see it. We also need to have a plan for rollback and the tools necessary to do that. We want greater cohesion, collaboration, and shared purpose amongst teams. Again, my career started as a project manager. And, I can't tell you how many times I worked on a waterfall project where, we chartered and we put together a plan and, we went through it, and then we got to the end or halfway through it and, new requirements came through. Well, now we've got to stop the press. We got to do change requests, now it's going to extend the schedule, the budget, right? And so we want that collaboration throughout the product life cycle so that we know that we're making the right investments. And if we're not, then we need to pivot as quickly as we can. We don't want to sink costs into something that isn't going to give us the value that we're expecting. And we need consistency in those processes. So we need a framework that can be applied across multiple across multiple groups within an organization or to multiple value streams that's going to give them oversight, transparency, and accountability.
Thanks, Chad. No, absolutely. And I think as we look at it from a quality perspective, we certainly have a lot of opportunities from pipelining to shifting left. Jen, I can talk a little bit about this just slide in general, and then would welcome your thoughts as well. The idea behind this slide is just as we're looking at pipelining things out, part of what we really want to do is better understand that build management and really get as much instant feedback to our developers, to our product owners as possible. And so part of this is really, building in that automation that's going to shift left. And that's really that middle row in this slide where we talk about something called CI automation. And so this is going to be really, shifting left to where that automation is being used more for the individual developer so that they can, as they're doing builds, they can really understand, hey, what exactly have I done, and what exactly, or has anything that I've done in terms of my current build, has it impacted the actual master dev stream or anything like that? So that's really where we have gotten into, really shifting left in terms of where, some of the pipelining and the continuous integration has gone. Jen, other thoughts about the agile delivery in terms of quality?
Yeah, I think, Chad made a good point earlier too that said, don't be discouraged, right? So we all want to drive the nice fancy car of automation, right? But if your organization's not there yet, I think there are very organic ways when you start this journey to build this process into your tool chain if you don't have access to some of those tools as well. So maybe I will say take heart and leverage some of those innovation thought processes to pursue that. So I know one of the teams that Chad's been working with has really just automated that kind of criteria, that definition of done from a quality perspective into their user stories, right? And so if you guys think about that, if you don't have access to some of the CI, CD automation and continuous delivery pipeline tools and capabilities, think about how you can embed some of that for your quality team into the team's approach to development in that time box, right? And I think we've seen that be incredibly successful, like Chad was mentioning, in this environment where you're trying to go from project to product and you have to kind of get people reoriented to these concepts about their role, their responsibilities, and kind of what is that exit criteria. And it's been a very organic way for us just to build that into Jira in the user stories to accomplish that. And it's really helped drive collaboration from team members who, quite frankly, were overwhelmed at the idea of moving into this new way of working at the outset of this engagement. So I think that's the other unique part about Agile is, we preach MVP. So from a quality perspective, start small, right? Run trial and error through some of these concepts and figure out how to build it with some minimal tooling investments. And I think you'll see incredibly positive gains that will help reinforce that business case for further investment in your tool chain over time.
Yeah, I absolutely want to build on that. One of the things that was asked as well was from one of the topics that we had talked about, just with how do you involve end users during the quality process of an agile team when the system being developed was developed 20 years ago. I think that's a great question, as a lot of us do try to update legacy systems. I think that the first thought is to really find out, hey, is there anyone still around that built that? But I think certainly there's going to be users that are using that. And so I think from one point of view, it's certainly to reach out to that current user base community to better understand exactly what are the latest and greatest features that they are using. I think looking at the 80-20 rule has certainly been applicable to a lot of organizations where even if it's 20 years old, a lot of times it is just 80%, that 80-20 rule in terms of functionality. But Jen or Chad, did you want to talk a little bit more about that as well?
I can take a stab at it. I think that one of the things we've also found that's very successful with legacy technology is doing observational studies. So not necessarily putting somebody on the spot about what would they change about the entire way they work with that system, but also just having them walk you through the processes that they're responsible for and how they move through the system. And then being able to take some learnings from that back to the team and offer some suggestions back around ways that we could drive efficiency or things maybe that seem clunky in current state that we could implement, relatively easily for some quick wins, right? I think that's the beauty, again, of iterative development, right? Is if you can make some continuous improvements that don't totally rock the boat and cause someone to log in one day and say, I don't recognize this whatsoever. I think that's very helpful as well. So where we've had personas, like Chad was mentioning from a design thinking perspective, where they're very attached to the legacy or they're nervous about change, we've actually used observational study methods where it's, let's start with the screen sharing session and it's a little less formal, right? And we just kind of walk through the way you're using that application and how you leverage it to accomplish your daily tasks and job duties.
Great, thanks, Jen. Chad, I was thinking we should move on to talk a little bit more about the next pie piece in terms of scaling compliantly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. So there's a really good image for this. Sorry that it's not included here, but I think, as you scale from, your team level to your program, to the solution, to the portfolio, compliance lives in all of that, right? And so, Jen, you kind of mentioned how, for our source of record, right, we're using Jira for a particular client. And so, we want to make sure that they are able to integrate that source of record with their ALMs. So, we have, use connectors and some of the APIs that Jira has provided to be able to make that connection so that compliance information is stored in the appropriate location without having to do dual entry. We also have taken an approach where we as a development team, and part of our definition of done for the Agile release train is that, okay, when it's ready to go to compliance or regulatory, or if it's ready to go over to our quality organization for a thorough review, the team has effectively called that work done. In their eyes, it's production ready. And now we're doing a final verification validation before release, right? So it goes to quality, or it goes to legal and review for regulatory compliance, right? And so now we've effectively given that responsibility for release to the business, because, once that comes back and understand, right, that there might be some bugs or issues that pop out of it that the team will be ready to dynamically approach and address. But given that everything goes well, right, then we empower the business to say, okay, this item's, is ready to release, right? And so the team's going to be ready for that. And it's going to be a conversation or a part of, their iteration or sprint planning to ensure, hey, for the next iteration, we're going to be doing that release into production or to our customers, right? So we just want to make sure that, from whether it's the team, the program, the solution, or even the portfolio, that we're thinking about compliance, that we're building that into our non-functional requirements, that, we're inviting the right stakeholders should there be a compliance concern. Not everything needs the same level of regulatory rigor. So we just need to make sure we're taking a common sense approach to that and not putting everyone through the same value stream for compliance where it may not be applicable.
Thanks, Chad. Jen, did you want to talk a little bit more about, from a quality perspective, how we can, scale compliantly?
I think, like Chad mentioned, a lot of times it's intimidating at first when you start to scale and you have a very complex organization. And again, I think it's really building out some of those practices and understanding, when we say definition of done, what does that mean as a team? And what are the commitments that we're making to each other in that process? And one of the things that we find to be inherently beautiful about scaling and that framework from a scaled Agile perspective is that the framework itself and the roadmap, if you implement it according to the rigor and the structure that they implement into kind of the core ceremonies and the core practices, is that it really builds a lot of that structure in. And then it's incumbent on the team to follow through with that discipline. And so, again, I think it's finding what fits with the team and right-sizing that approach. But it really comes down to the transparent feedback about what the definition of done means and what it's going to take to get there. And then when you're going through inspect and adapt, right, being honest with yourselves about what is sustainable as you scale, what's no longer sustainable as you scale, and how are you going to work through that from a quality perspective? Do we need to introduce additional resources into the program or the team? Do we want to invest in different tools in that tool chain? And so I think there's some fairly just straightforward steps that organizations can take to start to look at that. And then, like Chad mentioned, I think another piece that we're getting ready to talk about here in a minute is the information radiators that you're going to look at through how you're measuring and how quality can play a role in that as well, to kind of help you identify where you need to support the organization as it scales.
Well, thanks, Jen. I think that's absolutely spot on. I think, both you and Chad have really hit it. It's part of one of the other, I'd say, practical applications is we've got V and V up there for just some of our FDA type clients. And I think that's been a real challenge in terms of just, we've got, not only the compliance of just making sure we're scaling correctly, but also then a regulatory compliance on top of that. And so I think that really is something that, we've looked to with organizations through the quality lens to say, hey, whether it's implementing automation or to Jen's point, if you're not ready for that, there are ways that we can, really take a hold of making sure that we can help organizations, scale, but also do it compliantly. So the last piece is measuring consistently. Chad, we'll have you kick us off one more time.
Awesome. Yep. So when we talk about measuring consistently, I conjure up images of at a portfolio level across the board, right? Are we measuring the same way, and are we looking at things in a repeatable, scalable way? And so for executives, right, what they want is real-time, up-to-date views, I call them dashboards, right, into where the value is being delivered in their portfolio, and relate this value to budget allocation and map to the corporate strategy. So again, back to that MVP approach. And I think it's, fair to also mention MMF, right? Minimum marketable functionality, right? So we're not just building MVPs, we're not just building a minimum viable product, but then we're going to add some functionality to it as well, right? And so some of that helps with the CapEx, OpEx, and we're not going to get into that today. But when we think about, the budget allocation, that map for the corporate strategy, those are things to be thinking about. Providing executive level reporting that can be regularly, quickly, and accurately delivered. I really like dashboards because it provides a conversation piece, right? You can't just always look at a dashboard and get a clear picture, but it obviously supports it, right? That's what our big visible information radiators are for. And then we want to promote transparency and accountability through metrics and scorecards that verify what teams are working on and how efficiently and effectively they're doing that. So, we want to have quality metrics. We want to have customer satisfaction metrics or employee engagement metrics or time to market metrics. So we definitely want to look at those types of things. And then we want to, look at leading indicators to understand, are we getting that immediate value or that initial value for us to, continue to spend on development because we're seeing an early, increase in the usability or in the people that are coming to purchase that product.
Great, thanks, Chad. And last but not least, I'll have Jen kick us off, talking a little bit about how we measure that.
Sorry, real quick, I saw there's a question in the chat. Do you mind if I answer it?
Yeah, go ahead, Chad. Sorry, I didn't see that.
Yeah, no worries. So an example of a dashboard showing business value. So, we've been talking in the context of SAFe because, for us, that framework really resonates with our stakeholders, and we've really bought into the framework as a whole and the practices and the principles. And so one of the metrics that come out of Scaled Agile is your program predictability measurement. And so basically what that measurement is used for is how accurate are the commitments that are being made between business and IT, right? And and that measurement comes from business values. So what we're doing is we're going to have each team, summarize IE and PI objectives, what it is they intend to deliver from the lens of business values. So our business owners participate in these events, and they're going to circulate or, while we're virtual, visit the different whiteboards that we're using and say, okay, this particular objective to me is worth this, right? And it's a subjective scale 1 to 10. Again, we're not talking about ROI. It really shouldn't be left up to the people who are doing the delivery of the product to know that. It's up to product management to understand, are their investments panning out the way they need them to, right? So from a business value standpoint, and just in that shared commitment between business and IT, we use the program predictability measurement as a way to measure not only value delivery, but are we actually hitting those commitments that we're making?
Perfect. Thanks, Chad. We just got a few minutes left, so I'll turn it back over to Jen for this last piece.
Yeah, I just was going to, from a quality perspective, going to lean into some of what Chad said about the different elements and metrics. And I think in quality, traditionally, we're very used to transactional metrics, right? So we look at, after the fact, how many defects do we have? We look at, how many test cases have we completed in X period of time? And I think, years ago, GE Healthcare had done a round of presentations out at conferences, and they talked a lot about how, they implemented test-driven development. And it was really a result of a lot of spaghetti code, right? Because developers were writing code, knowing that the QA team would find it and fix it, right, from a defect perspective. And so when they implemented test-driven development, what I always talk to clients and our teams about is they really built in the measures up front with that collaboration between the developer and the QA team. And part of that was measuring not only test coverage, right, but the code quality through those code reviews that we talked about in an iterative development lifecycle, as well as then kind of speed, right? So how quickly can we move when we're collaborating together in a test-driven development environment? And then at the end of the day, there's also that people metric that Chad talked about, right? So do people feel better about the work they're doing when they're collaborating with someone who can help them with their ideas and help them implement the business's purpose for that feature, right? Do you have better workload distribution and capacity management across your team and less attrition over time? And so I think some of those measures are other executive dashboard items that you can start to look at that start at the quality level, but really affect the team health and performance over time, especially as you're iterating through in an agile life cycle.
Thanks, Jen. As we're kind of running up on time, I just wanted to kind of recoup a little bit. That we definitely have a lot around quality in terms of just the idea of the embracing and empowering leadership, meeting the digital demand, and really hitting a lot of the pipelining, the continuous support, the measuring consistency. These are really some of the key things that we take away from an agile implementation, and making sure that quality is at the center of it. So I'd love to thank TechWell for the opportunity to speak, and thank Chad and Jen for their great insights into a scaled agile implementation, along with keeping quality at the center.
Thanks,
I believe
Michael.
I was told. Thank you. I'll turn it back over to Rochelle, you or whoever needs to go back to.
Those are a great set of questions throughout the presentation. You may visit BC Forward's and TapQA's website for more information and contact Michael directly. This concludes our technical presentation for today. I'd like to thank Jennifer, Michael, and Chad for their time, and BC Forward. A special thank you goes out to the audience for spending your time with us. Enjoy the rest of your day.